Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Hands Where I Can See Them, or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by FlyingBlueBirds, and you can find a link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Britt. Hands Where I Can See Them, Chapter 7. For a moment, Alder only looked at Tally, without saying a word. So Tally simply stared back, a stoic expression on her face, determined to finally get some answers. Still, she couldn't help but take the woman in front of her in. Alder was wearing casual clothes, dark jeans and a loose gray t-shirt. Her hair was down again, framing her angular face. It made her look softer and immediately gave Tally flashbacks to last night, which she quickly tried to shove back into the furthest corner of her head. She was here because she was mad, and she wouldn't let herself get distracted by a pretty face, no matter how tempting that face was. And goddess, it really was. However, Tally also noticed the dark circles under Alder's eyes that even the light makeup she had put on couldn't quite conceal. There was a worn-out expression lying on her face, a tired look, almost as if she had barely gotten any sleep last night. Well, considering the events from last night, that was probably exactly what had happened. Tally had to admit that, as terrible as it might sound, it was actually a bit reassuring to see Alder like that. It somehow made her more human, more approachable, and slightly less intimidating. It was good to know that even the Detective Alder was immune to a party night filled with alcohol, inappropriate men, and mental breakdowns, even if those didn't happen on her part. Still, thinking about the fact that in addition to the busy night, Alder must have also learned this morning that the serial killer she had been hunting for almost her entire career was suddenly back. It was impressive that she was even standing in this doorframe at all. Alder still hadn't said a word, and the silence between them was starting to feel very uncomfortable. Then, finally, the older woman cleared her throat and raised her eyebrows in question. Tally almost let out a sigh of relief when she addressed her. Detective Craven, to what do I owe this pleasure? I think you know this as well as I do. Alder sighed in resignation, not even trying to put on an act, and probably too tired to actually fight back. Instead, she stepped aside and gestured inside her apartment. Do I now? Well, I don't even want to know how you managed to find my address. But now that you're already here, I can hardly just send you away again. So why don't you come on in? Oh, how incredibly kind of you. Tally couldn't hide the sarcasm in her voice. Her reply sounded way sharper than intended. She didn't even know why she's suddenly so pissed at Alder. She only came here to finally get some answers. But the way in which Alder was standing there, talking to her as if nothing had happened, as if Tally hadn't spent her entire day dealing with a freaking serial killer, was really not sitting well with her. She wasn't going to lie. She had expected Alder to treat her differently after last night. The moments they had shared had felt so special, so intimate to Tally. Like there was some sort of connection between them, but instead, Alder seemed to be back to shutting Tally out and hiding behind her walls, not daring to show what she truly felt. It hurt, but for once, Tally couldn't let her own emotions interfere. Last night was not her reason for coming here. She knew she would need to address it eventually, but one difficult conversation at a time. For now, the Camarilla killer mattered more. Once she followed Alder into the apartment, however, her anger was for a moment no longer her main priority. Instead, she looked around curiously as they walked through a small hallway, and Alder guided her into a rather spacious living room. "I'll quickly grab you something to drink. Please, try not to destroy anything while I'm gone." With that, Alder left her alone. Tally usually wasn't one to pry, but the arrogant tone in Alder's voice had fueled her anger once more, so she shamelessly started to investigate the living room. This place didn't look the way she would have imagined Alder's apartment to look like at all. She would have expected something modern, a lot of glass, expensive marble, and maybe an uncomfortable designer couch that nobody ever wanted to sit on. Basically, an apartment straight from a high-end real estate magazine that always had a bit of a cold and impersonal touch, almost as if nobody was living there at all. Instead, the room she had just walked into made her feel like she had somehow ended up in a different century. The furniture was almost completely made out of dark wood, and the maroon-red couch in the center of the room looked so comfortable that Tally considered sitting down there immediately. But, yet again, her curiosity was stronger, and she continued to take the room in. She could spot an old phonograph in a corner. That was interesting. She wouldn't have pictured Alder as a music person, let alone someone who would be into old records. What didn't surprise her, however, was the large cabinet near the window, which seemed to be filled entirely with whiskey. She knew of Alder's likings for the beverage. Still, the size of her collection was impressive. An image started to form inside her head. Alder in comfortable clothes, sitting on her couch, a glass of whiskey in one hand, listening to some vintage records with closed eyes and quietly humming to the tunes. Tally herself curled up next to her, head resting in her lap. Alder's other hand would lazily play with her hair, and after a little while would slowly trail lower under the hem of her shirt and Tally Craven. She immediately scolded herself for once again very inappropriate fantasies. Goddess, what was this woman doing to her? Sex dreams were one thing. She could deal with them. No, she couldn't. Who was she kidding? But why was she now already making up domestic scenarios that included soft music and couch cuddling? Damn, she really was in way over her head. She forced herself to focus back on the room, distracting herself from her thoughts, and instead of trying to get as much new information about Alder out of this as possible. There were no framed photographs put up, but that didn't surprise Tally much. As far as she knew, Alder didn't have any family, and she wasn't the kind of person that would put up silly shots of her and her friends everywhere. Instead, there were several small sculptures and art pieces on the shelves. Tally didn't understand much about art, but she could tell that those were probably really expensive. What fascinated her the most about the room, however, was the number of books in it. They seemed to be lying around everywhere. Some were stored tightly on bookcases, others were just piled up on the ground. She could spot books of almost every genre on a large shelf next to the door, a lot of crime and nonfiction, but also some poetry and prose. Interesting. Tally then stepped closer to the couch table and grabbed the book that was lying on it. She couldn't suppress an amused chuckle when she recognized that it was a copy of Pride and Prejudice. What's so funny? Tally jumped and quickly put the book back on the table. She blushed slightly when she spotted Alder standing in the doorframe, watching her curiously, a glass of water in her hand. Nothing. I just wouldn't have pictured you as someone who would enjoy Jane Austen. Well, Craven, it seems that there are quite a lot of things that you don't know about me. Alder had apparently decided to cut straight to the point. Tally sighed in defeat. Her expression turned serious again, and she reminded herself of the reason she came here in the first place. I just want some answers. And what makes you think you are owed any? Tally shouldn't be surprised by Alder's bluntness anymore. Still, she blinked at her, slightly taken aback by the direct confrontation. She took a moment to collect her thoughts, considering her words carefully, and decided to be just as blunt. What makes you think that I am not? A brief silence followed Tally's reply, and Alder seemed to debate with herself for a moment. Then, she finally let out another, tired sigh and nodded in the direction of her couch. Fair enough. Why don't we start by taking a seat? No need to do this standing around. It's going to be uncomfortable enough anyway. Tally followed her invitation, and once they had both sat down on the couch, she suddenly didn't know how to start the conversation anymore. Alder's words had been blunt, but she had had a point. She could hardly just accuse Alder of not sharing her deepest and darkest secret with her, simply because she felt like she deserved the truth. She could feel Alder's eyes on her, waiting and giving her the chance to say what she wanted to say, but when she realized that Tally was completely overwhelmed with everything, it was actually her who started talking first. "So, I figured you have been enjoying your day with Nikta?" She had expected Alder to know about this. What she hadn't expected, however, was the slightly jealous and bitter tone of Alder's voice. The question was, who was Alder jealous of? Her or Detective Bataan? Thinking about it, Tally wasn't even sure if she wanted to know the answer to that question, and it really didn't matter at that moment. So instead of getting into the mess of Alder and Bataan's past future, Tally only gave a vague answer, leaving it to Alder to decide the turn their conversation would take. "It's been interesting." Well, interesting was one way to put it. It definitely would have been more accurate to say that Detective Bataan had been a pain in her ass the entire day. Tally had, in fact, never missed Alder more. Bataan just didn't seem to give a single shit about anything. Her inappropriate jokes had driven Tally crazy and had made her snap at the older detective several times, and Tally almost never snapped. Bataan had found her outbursts nothing but amusing, which had only enraged Tally further. What had annoyed Tally the most, however, were the ambiguous comments Bataan had made about Tally and Alder. It all had started with Bataan testing the waters with some simple, teasing words about watching Tally and Alder dance last night, and of course, Tally had immediately blushed and started to squirm. That had, of course, been exactly the kind of confirmation Bataan had been looking for. She had been all over Tally after this, and once Tally had actually recovered enough to shoot back some witty replies, it had only been making things worse. Bataan had had the time of her life, pointing out just how much Alder would enjoy Tally's quick tongue, and Tally had been very close to simply committing another murder right there and then. Generally, the day had been quite frustrating. Tally spent most of it searching every inch of that barn, investigating every straw she could find, hoping it would give her something, anything, that would bring them a step closer to the Camarilla killer. But as usual, he hadn't left anything behind. No fingerprints, no DNA evidence, no traces on the victim. When she had had a small break, she had written a quick text to check up on Abigail, who had then told her that she and Detective Quartermain had been sent to speak with the victim's family. Tally had wished her good luck, and suddenly hadn't been all that sad about her frustrating job at the barn anymore. Ringing on doors to tell complete strangers that their life would never be the same again really wasn't something she was looking forward to experiencing. A bit later, Scylla had waved her over, ready to give her the first overview of what had happened to the victim, but this hadn't given Tally any new insight either. This murder had followed the exact same pattern as the 12 others before it. The victim had died around 1 to 3 a.m. last night. The killer had strangled her to death, presumably with some sort of thin rope. He had then used a sharp scalpel to cut her open and remove the vocal cords before he had put the dead woman on the stake inside the barn and had set it aflame. It had only been one day, and Tally couldn't even begin to imagine how hard and frustrating it must be to work on a case like that for months, years even. In the end, Tally had sounded bitter when she had turned to Detective Bataan and had been able to stop an exhausted sigh from leaving her mouth. So in conclusion, we don't know anything, and everything is just the same as it always has been. That's how it seems, Red. Absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. The way Bataan had given her reply had made Tally wary. It had come a bit too quick, had sounded a bit too convincing, and Tally could have sworn she had actually seen Bataan twitch at her words. It had once again given the feeling that something else has been going on here. Something she, and probably almost all of the other detectives at the scene, were intentionally left in the dark about. That had been when she had decided that she had had enough of all the secrecy. She had needed answers, and now she might finally get some. She briefly summarized the frustrating events of her day for Alder, purposefully leaving out Bataan's inappropriate teasing. Alder listened to her attentively, and without interrupting her, but in the end, She apparently came to the same frustrating conclusion as Tally. The investigation at the crime scene wouldn't get them a single step closer to catching the Camarilla killer. Once Tally was done with her report, she found her courage again. She looked at Alder firmly, not ready to back down again, and managed to make her voice sound way more confident than she actually was. So, that was my part. Now it's your turn. Tell me what the hell is going on here. No more secrets. No more lies. Alder only sighed in response. She still didn't look fully convinced. I can't. You don't understand. Then make me understand. Tally could feel herself getting mad again. They kept going around in circles. Alder was looking her in the eyes now, silently pleading with her to simply let go, to protect herself. I cannot justify putting you in harm's way. You would be in so much danger. Tally's patience snapped at that, and her voice got louder. This probably wouldn't get Alder to cave in, but at least it felt damn good, to finally let some of her anger out. I've just spent my entire day poking around the remains of a completely burned woman that had been killed by a serial killer. A serial killer that you seem to have valuable insight on, that you don't want to share with me. Don't you think it's a little late for the whole protecting thing? The only way for you to keep me safe is to tell me just what the fuck is going on. Tell me what I'm up against. And don't let me walk into an open flame. For God's sake, you are not my mother. No, because just how awkward would that be? I'm a grown woman. I can take care of myself, and I have every right to do just that. I know it's hard for you to understand, but you cannot protect everyone. You are only breaking yourself more with that behavior. And someday, you simply won't be able to patch up the holes, and everything will crumble down on you. When she looked at Alder again, the other woman quickly lowered her head. Still, Tally was surprised to see that she was desperately trying to blink away her tears. Alder had folded her hands in her lap to hide how they were shaking. She had been trying to keep it together the entire time, but now Tally's words seemed to hit her right where they hurt the most. She looked completely broken, like a woman who had spent way too much time carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders in order to protect others. And Goddess, Tally was so ready to take at least some of that weight off of her. Alder suddenly looked incredibly vulnerable, and Tally's whole demeanor immediately softened. She almost felt sorry for her harsh words, no matter how true they were. She reached out and took one of Alder's hands into hers. She was struggling at first, clenching her hand into a fist in a desperate attempt to keep some control. But Tally was gently forcing her fingers apart and linking them with her own. Look, I can't force you to share anything with me, and I won't try to do that. Her voice was calmer now, almost apologetic. But can't you see that I'm here because I have faith in you? Because I trust you? And I want you to trust me. Because I need you for this. Because I have no idea how to work this case without you. Because I don't think it's fair that you are dealing with this all on your own. She was quiet for a moment, then spoke again. Her voice barely more than a whisper. I won't let you destroy yourself over this, because whether you like it or not, I do care about you, Sarah Alder. She could hear Alder taking in a shaking breath. That's exactly what I was afraid of. She sounded so tired that something inside of Tally broke. She wanted to reach out, pull Alder in a tight embrace and tell her that everything would be all right. But she knew that saying something like this would be nothing but a lie. Things were far from being all right, and there was no point in denying that. So, she only smiled sadly and waited for Alder to continue. Look, Craven, I don't work well with others. I'm controlling. I hurt people. I'm unfair, and I am ruthless. I'm sure Nikta will tell you all about it. I'm not Nikta. I know, but I'm still me. Alder looked up now, and Tally could see a million of different emotions reflecting in her eyes, fighting their own silent battle. Anger, fear, insecurity. Finally, it seemed like resignation and her own helplessness won. You deserve the truth, and I will give it to you. But you need to understand that if you are going to work with me on this, I won't make it easy for you. Tally nodded, determination written across her face. She watched Alder get up, walk over to her whiskey cabinet, and poured him 2 glasses of a golden-colored beverage. She then handed one of the glasses over to Tally. Here, I'm going to need something stronger for this, and then we will start from the beginning. Tell me what you already know. Tally took a small sip and closed her eyes, almost enjoying the burning feeling the alcohol caused in her body. Then she started to talk. I know that a serial killer started to murder innocent women over 10 years ago. His murders were frequent but didn't follow a fixed schedule. He always killed his victims in the same way. He strangled them, then cut them open to remove their vocal cords, and finally burned them at the stake until they were barely recognizable. He always left behind a golden medal in which a pentagram and the number of his victims were engraved. That is why the media quickly drew some comparisons to the Salem witch trials and named him the Camarilla Killer. I know that you have been working on that case since day one. You were more devoted to that than any other detective, and frankly, everybody knew that if the Camarilla Killer would be caught, it would be because of your work. You were the heart of the case. You were present at every press conference. You managed to keep the public informed and aware of what was happening without causing panic. Until, suddenly, you weren't. You stepped away from the case after the 11th victim, and nobody could figure out why. I also know that you are now struggling with public speaking, which is why I believe that this has something to do with the whole Camarilla mess. I'm probably jumping to conclusions here, but I guess the Camarilla Killer did something. The public doesn't know about it. Something that directly affected you and forced you to step down from the case. The Camarilla Killer stopped his murders after this, so there's probably a connection as well. And that's about it. Alder had listened to her silently and without interrupting her once, then nodded, looking mildly impressed. Still, there was nothing complimenting in her next words. She only sounded defeated. Detective Craven, you really are too smart for your own good. She took in one last deep breath and a large sip of whiskey, and then finally started to talk. You have already covered the basics pretty well, and I can't say that you are wrong with any of your conclusions. Everything is indeed connected to the 11th victim. She had been killed like all of the other women, and her death hasn't brought us any closer to the Camarilla Killer. What you and the rest of the public don't know is that the victim's name wasn't Elizabeth Miller. Her name was Elizabeth Alder. She was my sister. Tally couldn't stop herself from gasping out in both shock and surprise. Your sister? Yes. Alder didn't even try to hide the grief that was washing over her face. It was obvious that she was still struggling a lot with her sister's death. She closed her eyes, and her upper lip was shaking slightly. Tally reached out again and squeezed Alder's hand sympathetically. She didn't let go when her partner started to speak again, and continued to reassuringly stroke the skin of Alder's hand with her thumb. The older woman smiled at her softly. Still, her voice was shaking slightly. The Camarilla Killer killed my sister, and it's my fault. My last family member is dead just because I couldn't stay away. And now it's all happening again. How is any of this your fault? Because what I just told you is not all of it. Because the Camarilla Killer did warn me that I'm overstepping. He left a message at his 10th victim, a letter, addressed directly to me. He told me to stop, or else I would suffer the consequences of my actions. I didn't listen. I kept doing all the press work. I provoked him, told the whole world that I am smarter than him, that his days are counted. So he found a way to get to me, and Elizabeth had to pay for my mistakes. Tally could hear Alder's voice breaking. She took a small break, a moment to collect herself. Petra called me as soon as they had found her. offered me her condolences, pitied me. But I didn't need any of that, and I still don't. Her reaction only proved to me what I already knew. I knew that everybody would look at me differently. The poor, broken woman who devoted her life to catching a brutal serial killer and was now paying the ultimate price. That was not who I wanted to become. I simply wouldn't have been able to deal with this. It would have destroyed me completely. So when Petra asked me what I needed, I asked her to cover everything up, to leave me and Elizabeth out of this, to come up with a fake identity for the victim, and only tell people on a need-to-know basis. I begged Petra, explained to her that it didn't matter to let the public know who the victim was, and that there was any connection to me. And to my surprise, she actually agreed. So that's why you stepped away from your case. Tally was still processing what Alder had just told her, but her partner shook her head this time, making Tally frown in confusion. No. I stepped away from the case because the Camarilla killer demanded it. He sent you another message? He did. Left it right next to Elizabeth's body. He told me that he had warned me, and that I am the only reason that Elizabeth had to die. And then he made me an offer. He said he was getting tired of the killing, tired of getting away each time. It was too easy. I started to bore him. So, he asked me to step away from the case, to learn from my mistakes, and simply let him be. He made clear that this specifically included public appearances, and said that he doesn't want to see me slandering his name in front of cameras ever again. In return, the killing would stop, and he would be gone for good. I didn't believe him, but frankly didn't see any other way. So I agreed to his terms, and, to my surprise, he actually held up his end of the bargain. The killing stopped. He disappeared. And after a while, the case became uninteresting to the public, and the people started to feel safe again. Everything was going well, and then I messed it up again. This time, Tally's brain caught up quickly. She put the pieces together, and everything started to make sense when she suddenly remembered why the name of their last victim sounded so familiar. The press conference in front of the courthouse. The woman who asked you so rudely about the Camarilla killer. Tanya Flynn? She's our victim. Yes. So she was murdered because of that? Because she made you break the deal? Are you sure this isn't just some weird coincidence? Trust me, as horrible as it sounds, I wish it would be that simple. But it's not a coincidence. Petra called me this morning as soon as she was informed about the body. There was another message for me. And you are telling me Captain Petra Bellwether, the personification of law and order, simply let it slip away, tempered with evidence, again? Alder actually chuckled at this. Petra does owe me a lot. Without me, she wouldn't be where she is today. Also, believe it or not, she has a heart. You know her daughter. The two are actually not as different, as they want to make everyone believe. It was still a bit hard to believe for Tally, but she still only knew very little about Alder and even less about her connection to Petra Bellwether. And, truth be told, if she would be in Alder's shoes, she knew that Abigail would react in the exact same way her mother did, without thinking twice about it. What does the message say? So sad to see her go. Another young life wasted, and all because of you. Isn't that quite the act? For someone who is no longer a real threat. Now you are facing an actual problem. It's your move, it's your choice. But remember that I am watching you. An eye for an eye, a death for a misstep. Will I be able to stop again? Come and find out. Alder stopped talking, let the heavy words of the message hang in the air between her and Tally. She was, once more, doing her best to hide her feelings. But Tally could see just how much she was struggling with the weight of the words she had just shared with her. Alder was staring at the ground again, desperately trying not to look at Tally, not to let her eyes betray her and let her pain show. Tally knew that Alder didn't want her pity, that she had spent so much time shutting everyone out. that by now she was absolutely terrified to let anyone close to her. But Tally wasn't anyone, and she definitely didn't approve of Alder's goddamn self-hatred, and the way she kept hurting herself by pretending to be an emotionless robot that wasn't capable of human emotions. So, Tally simply followed her instinct. She gently freed her hand out of Alder's grip, and instead reached out with both arms to pull Alder into a clumsy hug. She could feel her partner tensing up. She didn't lean into the hug and kept sitting stiffly on the couch, but she also didn't push Tally away and let her hold her. Detective Alder didn't cry. She didn't scream out in agony or started yelling. She stayed silent. But the way her whole body seemed to collapse as soon as it was no longer forced to stay strong hurt just as deeply. Tally didn't know how long they were sitting like that, but when Alder finally pulled free from their awkward embrace, she actually looked much better. She cleared her throat, and when she started to speak, her voice was almost back to its normal, firm tone. "Thank you." Tally only smiled warmly in return, then turned serious once more. "So, where does this leave us?" "I will speak with Petra first thing tomorrow morning. She shouldn't have dragged you into this, but now that you're here and just won't go away, there's no way I'm letting you run into this on your own." Tally was touched by her words and could feel a warmth starting to spread through her body. For once, because Alder wasn't trying to simply push her away again, but also because she would have her partner back. "So, it's going to be the two of us against the Camarilla killer?" "I'm afraid it's a bit more complicated than that. I've already talked with Petra about this earlier today. The Camarilla killer made pretty clear what will happen once I'm publicly back on the case. He didn't say that he will simply stop killing again, but me being the leader of the case will definitely enrage him. He might escalate, and that is one of the few things I can actively prevent here. I can't justify putting others in danger, and no, I won't even let you think about stepping in my footsteps. We will reopen the case, but someone else will be the leading detective." Tally already knew what was coming next, and she didn't like it. The look on Alder's face told her enough to understand that she was definitely sharing her sentiments on this. Detective Batan? Yes, Nikta volunteered. She's familiar with the case, and despite all, we have worked on it before. I'm not saying I approve of her decision, but I don't believe there's anything I can do to stop her. She told Petra she's ready for this, that she's not afraid, and most importantly, that she doesn't have anything to lose. There was something else resonating in Alder's words. Something that at this moment was too deep to put into actual words. Tally carefully mustered the woman opposite her, and then spoke again, her voice barely audible, nothing more than a soft whisper. "And you do?" Alder returned her gaze and only said two small words. "I do." Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.